Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Today's topic is why so many gods, and that applies on different levels, doesn't it? But we'll get into that. There's a polytheism perspective of, Hinduism, for example. But there's also, different notions of God, Jehovah, or what have you, in different religions. And even within polytheism, like in the Shiva Puranas, it says Shiva is the highest God. All other gods bow down to him, and then in the Vishnu Puranas, it starts out, Lord Vishnu is the highest God. All the other gods bow down to him. And it sounds like contradiction, polarization, us versus them. We're the ones that got it right, but then I explained that with my that diagram I saw in the ninth grade algebra book. This is just a diagram of some boxes, and you look at it one way, there are two boxes. You look at it another way, there are three boxes, and that's actually a very profound thing, because the underlying structure of existence is what they call an abstract algebraic structure. It's the mathematics of the structure of crystals. And, you look at a crystal, like in a kaleidoscope or whatever, you look at the image one way and you see one pattern. You look at it another way and you see a different pattern, and you can identify all kinds of patterns. And there's a lot more to it than that, and we'll get into it. But the whole field of, divinity, and the whole field of idealized notions, and the whole field of understanding, God, and maybe having a little better grasp of it than we may currently have. We'll get into that. But before we do that, I want to start with a new segment. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll do this every week. But I'm going to call it The Week in a Nutshell. And what inspired it was, I talked to different people, friends, or just people I bump into or what have you. And it's amazing how little, or what a narrow viewpoint so many people have on what's going on in the world. And so the purpose of this, the Week in a Nutshell, isn't to give my perspective. I don't think I have the right to try to force my perspective on other people, really, But what I'm going to try to do here is just give an idea of what perspectives are out there and what the main topics of the news have been over the past week. And then you can decide for yourself. I'm here with Scott Davalos today. Hey, Scotty.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. And I thought we'd start. Well, we can start anywhere. I think what I'll do is I'll go through some of the main topics. A lot of them we talked about before, you already know about. We're not going to spend a lot of time on any one. I think it's just enough that we plant a seed for people to reflect on,
Yeah, and it was funny when you were talking about that, Michael. I was thinking, it's like, how are we, how do we talk about, like, what it is that, I don't know how to put this, but what we are. It's like there's a dark orb, and there's like a little like thing that we can put up our eyes to, and whatever one of those little things that we can put up our eyes to shows us.
See.
Yeah, that's what we see through that portal or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you were telling me something about blue, and they never used to be able. What was that? Can't see the color blue.
I was reading an article. It's like they first found the mention of the, a word for blue from the Egyptians, and it turned out they were the only culture that could produce like blue dyes.
Oh.
And so they had a color for blue. Nobody else had a color for blue, and then they said they were trying to test whether they actually couldn't see blue, but just nobody knew about blue, because it just doesn't occur naturally. Other than the sky, there's really nothing in nature that's blue.
Well, what about the sky? You know, what did they see
Yeah,
when they looked at the sky?
that's what I was. But they just never saw. You know, it's just they looked at the sky. They didn't
Well,
think
then
of it as.
you were telling me about the Indians, American Indians, when the first ships came over from Europe.
Yeah, they didn't see. You know, there was another thing that they couldn't see the ships. You know, because they had never. You know, I think it was the Mexican the Aztecs, or not the Aztecs, whatever, the Mayans or whoever it
Hmm.
was that
Hmm.
they ran into first.
They
They
couldn't see the ships.
Yeah, it was like until something, they landed and then it kind of got shook into their reality. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, what is that?
No
You
kidding.
know?
Well, it makes me think about like the that test we've cited in the past about the experiment they did at MIT, where they put a bunch of kittens in a room with all horizontal lines or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then after so many weeks or whatever, they took them out of that room, put them in another room with all vertical lines, and they all flipped over on their sides. They couldn't even see
Yeah.
the horse.
That was normal, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was normal. They couldn't even really compute the other. And those sound like pretty far out abstract things, but when you talk about the news, it seems like, I don't care what side you're on, extreme right, extreme left, or what have you, isn't it true that people see it from one perspective and that's it? They can't
Yeah.
even see the other perspective, or it doesn't make sense to them, or they call it a conspiracy theory or what have you. But at any rate, the border, there were all those people living underneath the bridge, 12, or what was it, thousands of them, 15,000 of them at one point. And then all of a sudden 12,000 of them disappeared. And it took a long time to find out that what happened was that they released them, put them all in airplanes and released them to different parts of the United States, unvaccinated, diseased, I guess 20% they estimated, and just took them wherever they wanted to go, and now, but the thing is with the border, there are arguments that go different ways. One argument is it's an arbitrary line in the sand. What right do we have to have borders at all? People should be able to go where they want. And that isn't an argument. They consider the borders to be immoral. Of course, then there's the other side of that, which says that there's sovereignty, and you have to have the land and laws, and otherwise all you have is anarchy.
Well, what percentage of America even cares about any of this?
That's another perspective. Just bury your
Yeah.
head in the sand, put on the blinders, and live your life, and try not to think about it. I guess in other times, if the status quo is good, you can get away with that. But I remember I said to one person, I said, can you imagine someday the Chinese Red Army marching down Mount Soma Boulevard? And she responded, she said, no, I can't. And I said, that's the problem. It could happen. It happened in Europe, and then we could go on and on about that. But, there's so many, like Afghanistan. One argument is it was a huge success, taking all those people out. President Biden says it was a great success. And other people say how tragic it was, that we left all those people there and they're torturing them now. And U.S. citizens and people that supported America, are just left hanging, And then another thing that's important to know about is this whole infrastructure bill that's going through Congress, and without getting into the details of the two, the 1.5 trillion and the 3.5 trillion bills, and how they're interconnected, and they refuse to pass one without the other, and all that stuff. I think bottom line on that is the infrastructure bill, 9% of it is for infrastructure, and the rest is really pork. It's just other things that people want to get through, and they attach onto that. And so from the one side, it's like we can't afford it, and the other side, it's we got to do it. It's a whole new world we're creating for America, and it's the future. And then the whole thing, I imagine you've seen on the school boards, these meetings, and the parents they're all upset because they're promoting critical race theory. And one woman got up and she was, did you see that, Scotty? One woman got up and she was reading from some book in the library, and it was all pornographic. Men with boys and vivid, and even the people on the board who were, wanted her to stop reading because they said, "Oh, that's not appropriate reading." And she said, "It's in the high school. It's in your libraries." Yeah. So what happened then is, and I guess this was the Department of Justice, they're saying, came out with the idea of calling those parents domestic terrorists. And then, of course, they argue back that, Antifa and Black Lives Matter or what have you, they're burning down cities and we don't call them domestic terrorists. But these parents that get up and protest, what's being taught to the kids, and that it's basically a political agenda, if you will, and then, of course, they cite Putin, from Russia, saying that basically, give us a kid, the whole idea that the communist movement wants to separate parents from children. And they want to take over the kids. And they say, give us a kid for the first 4 years and we'll show you a good communist, So that whole thing is going on. And then Taiwan, and the Chinese are wanting to take over Taiwan, and that whole big mess. And then Australia. Scotty, do you know what's going on in Australia with the lockdown and the riots and the police
Yeah, I saw that they were coming after people that they had heard were, even, like they didn't wear masks somewhere, or they didn't do something, and just really coming after them.
Yeah, and the guy, they even put out a warrant for some guy's arrest because he went into an elevator without a mask and sneezed.
Yeah.
And evidently, I think he had tested positive. But anyway,
yeah.
And they're beating people in the streets. I mean, it's just horrible, from the news reports. And then again, some people would say, well, that's good. We got to lock things down. If people aren't willing to do it, then it has to be done by force, And then there are other people say, whatever happened to freedom, So all these debates, and then the whole immunity thing, and then they're trying to conflate the COVID virus vaccine with all the other vaccines, where it's very different. It's the only one that actually affects the DNA, the messenger RNA. And then how many people even know about that, and how many people even care? And then, of course, now, did you hear, Scotty, in Ireland or in Iceland, they've outlawed the vaccine. I don't know if it's all of them or just one of them, but they're not using it there anymore because of all the myocardial inflammation that they've gotten as a reaction to it. So it's been outlawed.
Yeah, I've heard definitely they pulled the Moderna one for Moderna.
Yeah.
For under 18 or something. I don't think it's just Iceland. I think it's a lot of Europe, like, or maybe the Scandinavian, because of the, there's an increase.
Side effects.
Yeah.
Terrible side effects in many cases. Yeah. Yeah. And then, well, then there's a book, and I haven't read it, but I heard about it, and I saw somebody talking about it on the news, called Woke Inc. And it's very interesting basic theory. The guy, I heard him interviewed. He's a very intelligent guy, and businessman, I believe, investor, I think. At any rate, he kind of gave a big picture, and he was saying that there's the woke group that he felt was, influenced, and kind of like with, for example, Black Lives Matter. Who would disagree with that? Black Lives Matter, you bet. But the people behind it were really Marxists, pushing a Marxist agenda. And like they say there, what you want to do is to take over a culture is undermine it. First you break it down, and then you infiltrate it with your beliefs. And the feeling there was that that's what they're doing with Black Lives Matter, burning down Seattle and Portland and all that stuff, And how many people know that? And then there's this whole movement backing it. Like I just heard recently this week, George Soros is funding, putting a lot of money into Austin, Texas, to defund the police.
Yeah.
I don't even get defunding the police. I mean, I get that if there are any rotten apples in the barrel, you get them out of there. But we need police. We need good ethical police, but we need police, And so what's the motivation behind all that thing? Anyway, you got this whole woke movement that got funded or built up in many different ways. Those are just a couple of examples. And then what you've got is that the woke group got involved with Wall Street. And Wall Street then adapted it and promoted it. And and then the Chinese kind of came in through the back door because Nike, the NBA, Coca-Cola, I think, a lot of different companies. Scotty, do you know of others that basically were making so much money off of China and so much money off the whole woke movement that they of buying for the money? That's one theory. Of course, all of these things, there's the other side of it. And all I'm doing here is presenting that, there are two sides of these things, and what people believe is based on whether or not they can see blue, whether or not they see horizontal lines or vertical lines.
In the next couple of weeks here, they're going to have all like public areas, restaurants everywhere. You're going to have be vaccinated to go.
Yeah, in LA, that's New York too.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, you can argue that's great, keep people healthy, On the other hand, whatever happened to freedom? And that gets into the whole thing that there's a debate between authoritarianism and just basic freedom. And where do the laws of the land come from? Do they come from the top, or do they come from the bottom up? The people. Authoritarianism is kind of a spooky thing to me, because even if you had some really gifted, brilliant people that were kind of running the country and making it better, if you set up a system of top-down authoritarianism, what about the next generation? Sooner or later, you're going to get a tyrant in there. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And then there's this whole thing about, have you seen this thing that this woman that was supposedly a whistleblower with Facebook? Do you know about that, Scotty?
Yeah, I saw the interview.
Yeah. And, when she was talking about how, what's that thing called? Not toolkit. What is it called?
The algorithms and.
Well, one of these websites that teenage girls especially access.
Oh, like TikTok.
TikTok, that's it. And they were trying to, really mess these girls up. And they were saying that it's, some girls, we were talking about suicide and just the bad effect it's having on kids. And so she was saying that, we have to put controls on this whole thing. And so it's, the government steps in and regulates it.
Yeah.
But then, did you hear this, Scott? Then what happens is they were coming up and saying, well, that's a Trojan horse. What's really going on now is they're going to use this as a way of getting the government to regulate even more so what people are allowed to hear on Facebook and all the social media platforms. And then, do you know who Don Lemon is? He's a newscaster on CNN.
Yeah.
And there was a really interesting thing that he was saying that kind of shook me up, tell you the truth. And he was saying, if it's not true, it should not be allowed. And so he was supporting more government regulation of what's going on Facebook and all. And the spooky thing about that is who determines what's true? Is it the Democrat Party because they're kind of controlling everything right now? They're in the majority. Or then you start looking back. Well, isn't that what they did in Nazi Germany? Isn't that what they did behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union? They decide what's truth and nothing else is allowed to be said. And isn't the whole idea that, people are presented both sides, which is really what I'm talking about here in a way, let's hear both sides and then you decide for yourself, But it just it weirded me out when I heard Don Lemon say that. It's like, oh my God, that's talking about a slippery slope,
It's a lot like, government was supposed to be what, of the people, by the people, for the people kind of thing, and government works for the people. And now it's kind of gives you the feeling that,
of the money, by the money, and for the money. Who's ever in power, it's
right,
power and
yeah.
money, and who's ever at the top, they get control, and the more control they have, the more power they have, the more money they get, the more autocratic the whole thing becomes.
Well, how do you go back to like the news? Depending on which news you watch, obviously they just put that perspective out, but how do we get back to like getting CNN, Fox, all of those really just
Opinion.
laying it out there like that?
Yeah. Well, it's a great point. And they've even talked about that recently. Is that the Department of Justice, the State Department, the IRS, almost all the main departments in the United States government, even the White House, it's all permeated by a particular perspective. And there's this guy, he's a very interesting guy. His name is Gorka, I think Sebastian Gorka. Have you heard him talk, Scotty? He was born in Hungary. His father was, fought the communists,
Yeah.
I don't know if with weapons or how, but so then Gorka came to the United States and actually got in the White House, was an advisor in the White House. And he said when he first heard about the deep state, he was like, oh yeah, right, that's ridiculous. He just couldn't buy it. It was a conspiracy theory to him. But in his functioning in the White House, he came to realize that it's real. And it's all these different Department of Justice, Department of State, FBI, CIA, IRS. It's the deep state. And this gets to what you're bringing up, Scott, has so permeated all these different departments that they're really running the things behind the scene. And the question comes up, how do you filter that out? How do you straighten that out? It's just so pervasive, And what this guy was saying is it's got to come from the people. We the people, it's about we the people, he was saying. And that's why I think, there might have been a time when people could bury their head in the sand and just go about their business and don't want to hear anything about politics or the news or any of that. But whatever side of the argument you're on, I think it's important that you at least become aware. That's all I'm saying. You become aware and then you make your own decision. But I don't think it's okay to just be oblivious, and these whole debates about, is it freedom or is it tyranny, or is this whole pernicious, kind of like a thief creeping in the night, kind of growing like a cancer, the deep state, they call it. If that's really going on, do we just kind of let it happen and go about our business? We at least need to get an educated thought. Oh, and then there was this woman, she used to be one of the people from 60 Minutes, that show 60 Minutes. I think everybody does, Scotty, huh? And her name is Laura Logan. You know who Laura Logan is, Scotty?
Laura Logan. I think I've heard the name.
Yeah, she was, I think, I could have this wrong. I think she was born in South Africa, and then she was on 60 Minutes for years.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but she was saying, this was unbelievable. Let me see if I can, she was talking about, look at what happened in Afghanistan. That's just nuts. Look what's happening on the border. That's crazy. Look what's happening with the vaccine. And she was saying it's an experimental vaccine. It's not even FDA approved, and they're pumping it in the arms of the majority of the population. And we didn't even get into the thing about ivermectin. It's a drug that people, that's a horse drug, horse warmer. The reality is the ivermectin came about in Japan, was developed by a researcher there, quite sure it was Japan. He got a Nobel Prize for it, for saving human lives. They rated it up there with, as far as valuable drugs that have been developed, right up there with penicillin, and then they're using that in Uttar Pradesh, a state in India, in different parts of India, that and they're saving scads of lives. They're practically stomping out the COVID virus with it. And she was saying, why would that not be? I'm sure it was her talking about that. why would they not make it available to people? I think it was her. And then she was saying, like, they can't make any money on ivermectin, but they're making billions on the vaccine. Of the money, by the money, for the money. I don't know. You decide. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you what the arguments are out there. But she cited all of these things, and I've just named a few of them. You know, the border, Afghanistan, the economy printing money like mad, trillions of dollars. And she said, when you really look at all the crazy stuff going on there, you know, letting men now in prisons can declare that they're identified as a woman. They put them in a female prison, and the rates have gone up. They have to pass out condoms. The whole thing is nuts in these female prisons because these guys decide they're women. But at any rate, she cited all these different examples. And then she said, nobody is that stupid. And she said she kept using the word stupid. You know, it's just too ridiculous. She said, it has to be done by intent. And then you start thinking about these conspiracy theories or whatever you want to call them about, you know, the Chinese or the deep state or what, you know, I don't know, infiltrating the country to bring it down so they can overthrow it. First you dissolve it and then you rebuild it to your liking, an authoritarian state. Many of which people say it's the Chinese that have their hands in so many situations, you know. Oh gosh, it goes on, you know. And the things they do, the things you hear about that they do, is they'll take a political leader and get them seduced by a hooker, and then they videotape what went on between the hooker and the political guy, and now they've got them in their pocket. Or just sure out buying them with, you know, money. And you've heard about all that stuff. But I think it's just good to hear it, and then you decide for yourself, you know. But when the way she said it was compelling to me. She said, so much nutty stuff going on. Nobody can possibly be that stupid. It's done by intent, you know. And then she was going on about Pakistan and how Pakistan funds the Taliban and how we are funding Pakistan and how we could change all of that around and what's going on in Afghanistan with ease. But for some reason, we just choose not to do it, you know. Anyway, having said that, that's just a glimpse at what's going on. And I think people need to have some awareness around it and then decide for yourself. And I heard a nice quote. It was just, it's not what a person does so much as it's what they tolerate. You know, and I think we do well to ask ourselves, how much are we tolerating? How much are we choosing to bury our heads in the sand and just tolerating what's going on around us? And is that really a wise way to go, you know? And then there was another study done recently, trust in the media. How many people trust the mainstream media? I just thought this was interesting. They said 70% of Democrats, 30% of independents, and 11% of Republicans trust the media. For what it's worth. All right, enough on all that. That was a long one this week, but it was the first time we've done this, and that's the week in a nutshell. And I don't know, we'll see. Maybe we'll do shorter versions or do some versions or what have you of the week in a nutshell every Sunday before we get into the main body. And the main body of this podcast is, why are there so many gods? What's that all about? And really, if you take a look at the main structure of the nature of existence that I've offered, it all kind of falls out of there. And the idea is that there's one source, the unified field of modern physics, because we're going to talk about if you will, and for some people this may sound kind of offensive, but the physics of God, the physics of existence, the physics of the nature of existence, you know, and that is that there's one underlying basis for everything. It's the source of all the intelligence and harmony and coherence that birthed this whole universe. It's the underlying structure of the whole thing. And the mathematics of it, like I said, is like the mathematics of a crystal, a multifaceted crystal. Only that crystal of the structure of existence is huge. It's not just a half a dozen facets. It's unbounded, you could really say, number of facets. And depending on what facet you view it from, you get a whole different kaleidoscope of structure that explains the nature of existence, you see? And then there's this idea that, you know, you look at another person, you don't see a bunch of electrons, protons, and neutrons. You see a human being, a personified being. And so you can say, is there, you know, what came first, the personified being or the electrons, protons, and neutrons? And either way, which gives it more meaning? Well, what gives it more meaning is the personified correlate. When you talk to another person, you're not talking to electrons, protons, and neutrons, you're talking to a being. And what birthed that being is the unified field. And so it's kind of ironic when you look at it that way, that we can think, oh yeah, there's a personified correlate to a human being, but the idea of that which underlies it, all the wisdom, intelligence, and coherence that underlies that, how could that be personified? How could that have a personified correlate? It's just too far out. Well, you know, it's how can you birth something out of something that doesn't have that same degree of coherence and intelligence within it? It kind of doesn't make sense, you know. They asked Einstein once, can you explain a sunrise in terms of pure physics? Something like that. And he said, yes, you can. He said, but if you do, it loses its meaning. And that's the same thing. There's this unified field and it births everything. It's the source of all of the intelligence. You can interface it from different angles through different facets of the diamond. And you can do that through physics, but you can do it through the personified correlates, which gives it more meaning. And so that whole structure, you see, has so many different mechanisms of action. Just like in mathematics, you have addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, different operators, we call them. And within the structure that manifests out of that one thing, it's called the quantum mechanical level in physics, that underlying complex structure, there are myriad, infinite number, if you will, of different personified correlates, that is to say, facets of interaction, modes of operation that emerge out of that wholeness, of that coherent structure. And so each of those personified correlates is what can be viewed as God, you know. And then some people, well, you know, which one is real? Well, they're all real. And well, you're saying there are multiple gods? Well, even people who are into polytheism, you know, in India, if you talk to them about polytheism, there always seems to me, at least in my experience, proud to say, well, that really there's only one God. And that's what they're talking about. One God, many faces, you know. And then there's so many, if you understand that, so many things fall in your lap, so many understandings. Like, some people will say, and I love the Baptist ministers, by the way. Sunday morning on the radio, I just love listening to their sermons because there's such a deeper truth, perhaps, to what they're saying than they may want to, you know, say on the air because it gets too complex, perhaps. But like they'll say, Jesus is the only way. And I was talking to a Baptist minister once, and he said to me, do you know, because he was like, oh, what are you doing here? Are you kind of weird? You know, do you believe Jesus is the only way? And I said to him, well, if you mean some guy, some, you know, chunk of flesh named Jesus, I said, no, I can't believe that. But if you mean Jesus the Christ, that is to say what he knew he was, what his physiology was so refined and unconvoluted that he could feel with clarity the true nature of his own being, which is what? Well, from the perspective of physics, the unified field. But from his own being, and on a personified level, it's God. And he knew he was one with God. And he knew that in that sense, there's only one God. And he knew he was that. And so in that sense, I say, absolutely. Jesus, in that sense, is the only way. But we can't underestimate the nature of the Christ, you know, multifaceted diamond, many names. And that's what births all these different religions, you see. But now it gets even more complicated than that. And because what is the degree of clarity with which we understand the nature of the whole thing? What sort of distortions get imposed upon it, oftentimes in the name of religion or tangential religions or what have you, that allude to that one thing? Because, we all feel it in our own being, that there's something deep within us that is, if, for lack of a better word, some people like this word, some people don't, but it's truth, and we all seek it in different ways. And even atheists, what would atheists call that? Well, it's their own sense of morality, and where does that morality come from? Deep within their being. But what happens is these different paradigms, these different mentalities, these different ideologies get created. And we see them, you got the woke ideology, you've got all sorts of different ideologies. And these different ideologies, even for some people that are atheists, these ideologies take over. And those ideologies, at least emotionally, psychologically, become their, God. And they adhere to that. And that's what they believe in. And the problem with that then is it's something that's floated on the surface of life that they claim to as truth. And there's some echo of truth. I like to say the echoes of truth perceived as truth hold truth at bay, because look at all the conflicting ideologies, and all of them somehow, in some perhaps twisted kind of a way, reach down into the depth of their soul and they say, oh yeah, I believe it, and so, when we talk about, why so many gods, I think we don't just limit it to this structure that can be scientifically precise, the different facets of the diamond, but also the echoes and the loose approximations and kind of hand waving around it that births all sorts of ideologies that can even reach to justifications for crazy things like genocide or whatever, because somehow in some twisted mental way people find that connection to, it's the idea that you want to feel one with everything, you want to feel unified with everything, you want to feel harmonious with everything. That's beautiful, isn't it? But in a twisted kind of a way where people go with that was, well, if I just kill everybody that doesn't think the same way I do, then I'll feel one with everybody and it'll be a beautiful world. So, that's why they say you can justify anything with the intellect. And people do. I like to say the intellect is a great tool, but it's a terrible master, you see, and that's why. Anything else on all this, Scotty?
Yeah, I just remember having, tons of conversations with people over the years just about how every religion is trying to say the same thing. They're just using their language to try to speak about that, that.
And see and the kicker there is,
yeah,
that it connects down to that place deep inside of them where they do know truth and they're passionate about it.
Yeah.
And so to try to refute something, an ideology perhaps that they have on the surface, is experienced by them as a refutation of that place of divinity and truth that dwells within them, that they've connected to that ideology, whatever it may be. And so it's almost offensive. It is offensive to them if you question, their belief,
Right.
And that's the world. That's where we're at today. That's and that applies to politics. It applies to theology. It applies to any sort of ideology or any sort of model that we may create in any arena. How the human psyche works, how physics works. all these ancient technologies weren't based on Newtonian physics. Newton wasn't even around yet, but they had technologies and they did work. They built the pyramids. They built these incredible things. But it just shows again how people get so caught up in their ideologies and their notions that because they didn't have the physics we have today, they couldn't have possibly known how to do that. So then it must have been UFO people that came down and did it. You know, it just gets crazy, you know?
Yeah. I like when you talked about how like there's a lot of different roads that go to Rome. You know, some are paved better than others. Some are faster to get to than others. You know.
Yeah. And if we can get past our identity with one ideology or one reality, even physics is a reality, but there are other realities that exist simultaneously. And knowledge of the mechanics of creation might be more easily accessible through one than through another. You see, even though both are rooted in truth.
You have to be able to pick up and put down the tools that best work for the situation.
Yeah. How do we say that? Wisdom is aligned with the reality that best serves the moment, you know?
Right.
And that sort of thing.
You can't build the house with just a hammer.
That's right. Even though a hammer's a great tool.
Great tool, yeah.
Yeah, that's good, Scotty. Yeah. So we have our gods. We have our demigods. We have our political leaders and our ideologies. And oftentimes in the world today, our allegiances have been misplaced from something that comes really and is seamlessly, flawlessly connected to the depth of our being, to some new version, some new popular version of what we think of as truth in God, you know. These days, ideology has largely become, I think, the new God, you know, sadly, for so many people. So that's why I say humility is the flip side of wisdom. And to attain wisdom, to attain real knowledge, requires a great deal of humility. And that's why in these podcasts, I do my best to try not to tell you what to believe. In fact, you know, I remember that moment when one student put up their hand and said, why do you say one thing one day and something else another day, and they contradict each other? And I just said, right. You know, that's why. It's called emancipation. Spiritual emancipation is freedom from the limitations of one narrow viewpoint. And I don't just mean intellectual viewpoint, I mean emotional stance, emotional viewpoint, emotional relationship with the world. If we become etched in stone, we become narrow in our vision. And Maharishi Patanjali, ancient master thousands of years ago, he called those samskaras, impressions on the mind, storehouse. Our mind is just a storehouse of impressions. And as those impressions soften, we become more flexible, more wise. And so it ceases to be like something etched in stone, but it becomes like maybe clay, and then maybe water, and then air, and then we're free, we're emancipated. We still function within the realm of paradigms, but we're not lost to any one of them, you see. And that's why, see, and then what happens, they, oh, well, if the mind is thoughts of impressions, then you get to this place of no mind. They talk about the state of no mind. I guess Zen Buddhists talk about that, but it gets also confused because we take that and we try to turn it into a paradigm and, oh, okay, I have no mind. I have no mind. That's not what that means. You know, it means we're free from the impressions that overshadow our awareness, you see. It's a very different thing. We could go on, and I think this is enough for today. Unless you have something else to add, Scotty, I think we'll wind up.
No.
All right, everybody. Sounds good then. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Scotty. And we will talk to you again next time on Ancient Secrets Revealed.